Hello, you 12. I am going to be talking you through three different poems in Blake's Songs of Experience today. I have a feeling this might be a lengthy video, so feel free to pause after each poem and just reflect and make some notes as you go along. I'm going to be addressing a recap for A Poisoned Tree. Then we're going to be tackling A Little Boy Lost and A Little Girl Lost as well. Now, I'd like us to start off, first of all, by just looking at this image on the screen. We can see here the tree of life, but in this instance, the fruit of temptation, and how this is synonymous with the devil, how it is also sparking up ideas about temptation and sin, essentially. The speaker of this poem is experiencing lots of repressed feelings, such as sheer anger and wrath. And due to that anger, which builds up and multiplies, it results in revenge. And the revenge is manifested in the image and the metaphor of the growing plant, or this kind of tree of sin and tree of knowledge. And as the speaker is nurturing this plant with his tears, it bores a fruit. And in this instance, it's the apple of temptation, which we recognise from the story of Adam and Eve. And as the foe or the enemy comes to eat the apple, it's kind of alluded to the fact that it kind of leads to the enemy's own downfall. And at the end of the poem is outstretched beneath the tree. So if we think about the image of the tree of life, or the tree of knowledge, it's one that brings about the fall of man. And for this reason, the poem explores how human knowledge can actually be used for very destructive ends. It explores how, when kind of an overwhelming sense of emotion, in this sense it's anger and repression and woe, kind of overcomes this a human, that actually it can hatch a really ugly and nasty plan for revenge. So we kind of start off through the poem looking at the human psychology and how the human wishes to gain revenge. And if we're looking at it from kind of the lens of psychoanalysis, it shows this innate human desire for damage and revenge if somebody has kind of sparked that on us. It's interesting that Blake addresses this through the extended metaphor of a growing plant, and how it's referred to as the poisoned apple as well. So poison, decay, disease is a recurring image across the Songs of Experience poems. This idea that religion and sort of negative thoughts are infectious, and actually that, you know, what we're doing really with the human abstract is, by fixating on these negative ideas, that we're more kind of nasty ideas are being born out across the human race, and actually we need to stop that. So this is a really good poem to discuss in association with the human abstract and these sort of human constructed human emotions, which kind of guide our actions, rather than us kind of stepping in and acting with real compassion and love. I've said here that the writer is almost likened to a serpent itself. It's kind of reveling from its nasty deeds, as it's kind of wishfully hoping that the enemy is going to eat this fruit. And what I'm also interested in is the tears, which are then contrasted with the smiles of this poem. And it's this idea that actually the speaker is not able to distinguish between their own emotions very well, or this idea that the smile is very deceiving and cunning and a way to scheme for this revenge. We have to say that there is an overriding link to be made with Adam and Eve's downfall here, and being exposed to knowledge, feeling shameful, but also hungry for more, which kind of reflects the human desire for greed and all the different ways that it can manifest. Greed through anger, greed through kind of manipulation, and in its most ugly form. As we know with all of Blake's poems, so I'm kind of parroting myself here, we see the simplicity through the form of this poem, the rhythm, the rhyming scheme, which is hiding the complexity of the themes that Blake is addressing, and also maybe a way of masking the jealous scheme which is being created by the speaker. Arguably, what Blake is really kind of making a point for here is that human empathy and compassion are to be kind of held much higher and greater in the human abstract than anything else. So why do we leave room for these nasty human states to kind of rule over the human psyche? And actually, maybe society needs to look at itself, and human behaviour needs to address and evaluate what it's doing. We're now going to move on to A Little Boy Lost, which will be in kind of a more complex reading this time. So I'm interested here by always breaking the poem down to images. We start off with a boy metaphorically lost, lost in his way, lost in the world, struggling to navigate himself in terms of the emotions that he's feeling, and wanting to voice those and to be comforted by those who have control over him in his life. Yet this brings a lot of upset. Weeping from the little boy himself, weeping from the parents, because of the sin that he has caused by his questioning and by challenging conventional morality. And as a result of this, the priest who is overhearing his challenges actually burns him at the stake. So it's a real tragedy, this poem, and one that is kind of leading up to something very negative about the human state. And once again, just like a poison tree, asking humanity to readdress itself. I think it's really important to make links back to The Little Boy Lost in Songs of Innocence, and how we have such an identical and symmetrical title, but the only thing that has changed are the articles. So we go from the definite article of the little boy, a specific little boy, to a little boy lost. So that's an indefinite article. So we don't know who this little boy is. Is it actually referring to anyone in humanity and in society? So if you cast your mind back to The Little Boy Lost, we have here a child navigating himself through the world, asking his father, his human form of a father, for help and advice. And the child is wet with dew and is left weeping. But there is a positive solution to this poem, as God finds him, guides him to the wandering light, and is reunited with his mother. So it's a kind of a challenging obstacle path that he goes on, but ultimately it's one that ends in positivity and a kind of happy relationship between the little boy, the mother, and the father, so the God. So we have kind of this idea that he's not ready for this world of experience. He's been left in the world of innocence because he's not ready for that. Whereas The Little Boy Lost is actually making him stuck in this world of experience in the most terrifying and dangerous form possible, resulting in his death. I'm going to go through the poem now. I'll read each stanza and talk to you about interesting ideas that feature in each of them. Naught loves another as itself, nor venerates another so, nor is it possible to thought a greater than itself to know. So we have here quite a bold statement, a statement that's declaring that the similar views that we've seen in The Clod and the Pebble, this idea that love is innately selfish. And because of that, how are we able to love thy neighbour as thyself? Which echoes, as I have in this first bullet point, the New Testament commandment of love thy neighbour as thyself, which Jesus, is a mouthpiece for that saying. So we have a paradox set up right from the beginning. And what I'm also interested in is the repetition of the N here, naught, nor, nor, kind of very definitive, always emphasizing what isn't possible. And that being here, the fact that love can be a democratic and shared experience. So we're left kind of wondering whose voice is opening this poem. Is it kind of a preacher? Is it a child? So we know this is about a little boy from the title, but the opening stanza kind of contrasts against that. We're not quite sure who it is coming from. Yet this little boy, as it soon becomes a case and we learn, he says, "And Father, how can I love you or any of my brothers more? I love you like the little bird that picks up crumbs around the floor." So we have here a direct calling from the little boy to the Father of God. And he says, well, I don't think I can love you anymore, as well as my brothers. So, who do I love the most? And there's that conflict there in the child, and he's kind of like read the interpretation of the Bible in perhaps a wronged way. So perhaps Blake here is criticising, that this very one-dimensional reading of the Bible, when actually it is something that is open to interpretation, and that we all have a right to understand it in our different parameters, and we all have a right to speak about it in our own way. But then there is kind of an added complication, because is it actually the little boy directly appealing to the Father of God, or is it actually the priest being kind of a voiceover for God himself? Who is it that represents God in this society? Is it a kind of mythical divine force, or is it through the human form of the priest in society, and through the idea of the blackening church that kind of springs to mind every time in London? Notice that we have the rhetorical question. The child is beginning to question lots of large human ideas, as you would do as a child, being innately curious, and even as an adult we still have these questions. But notice how the boy is always being described with the adjective little, a little bird, as though he's vulnerable, as though he's appealing to these notions of freedom of thought, freedom of imagination. But actually we're going to find out that freedom is caged through the symbol of God, the human form of the priest. But I'm also interested by, we're comparing a little bird that picks up crumbs around the door. This idea that the little boy is appealing to its elders, or to a higher being or a higher force, and is almost like enslaved to that figure, picking up crumbs like a servant, kind of scurrying around at the priest's feet. And the priest sat by and heard the child in trembling zeal. He seized his hair, he led him by his little coat, and all admired his priestly care. So the priest has sat by, he's kind of an outsider listening to the musings of this young boy, and he's trembling with anger, trembling with that ferocity, which becomes, he becomes a fanatic, ruled by these kind of dark emotions, this violent cruelty, which means the boy is about to experience something very cruel and unforgivable. He seizes his hair, so we have the boy here being kind of stripped of any strength. He's vulnerable, and even the parents here are entirely useless, and kind of they have no power in this. They're powerless. And once again, the repetition of the little coat, which is being represented, as though he's just kind of passed from pillar to post, has no strong voice here. As soon as he is able to, feels the ability to start questioning things, that power is taken away from him. And standing on the altar high, so this reference to the imagery of hierarchy and being higher in stature, in status than the little boy. So that contrast is always being discussed here. Lo, what a fiend is here, said he, one who sets reason up for judge of our most holy mystery. So we have the little boy who's accused of being a fiend. He's beginning to question things, and therefore reason is beginning to attack some of the very foundations of the spirituality of the church. And this little boy is kind of hacking away at the holy mystery. Once again, mystery, secrecy, hiding things is something greatly explored by Blake, particularly with his interpretation of religion, the shade and the darkness, this idea that it's kind of only for a closed group community that are able to kind of have this inner truth. And for the rest of society, there's this kind of false consciousness and an ideology that is accepted rather than questioned and challenged. So it's interesting that from this innocent boy from the offset is actually all of a sudden changed to become something that is seen to be feared and a threatening force just through the use of questions. The weeping child could not be heard. The weeping parents wept in vain. They stripped into his little shirt and bound him in an iron chain. Notice here the reference to the weeping that's occurring. He couldn't be heard. He's now voiceless after the questions that he's posed. The parents, as I said, are powerless. They have they're kind of standing back. They're the bystanders in this, which makes them complicit to the crime, in my opinion. They stripped him to his little shirt. So we're now kind of having the uncovering, stripping down to the nakedness of his identity, which, in the golden age would have been something celebrated and seen to be the epitome of innocence and joy and blissful harmony, whereas here it's seen to be attacked and seen to be, lead to this very raw state of the young boy. And that littleness is even subjugated further through the idea of the iron chain, and how the chain is something that's very heavy, it's painful, and that's the thing that he is now trapped by. And kind of, I guess, a note of the symbolic oppression that's now taking place. And burned him in a holy place where many had been burned before. The weeping parents wept in vain. Are such things done on Albion's shore? As we come to the denouement of this poem, we have the boy, as I've said, who has been burnt at the stake, and all the parents are left to do is weep in vain. Are such things done on Albion's shore? So Albion here is a mythological reference to Great Britain, which I'll go into in a moment. But the thing I want to address is the plosive sounds of the bee coming across, this kind of attacking punishment which is being subjected to the young boy. And I think there's a real irony surrounding the word in a holy place. How is this a holy place when the only way to deal with the questions that are being asked is to lead to somebody's death? And notice that this is not just one child. There's actually many that have been burned before. So we're kind of speaking to a great range of people that this might be kind of involved in these actions. And so the reference here to Albion, it links with the reason that we've explored through kind of Blake's own mythology on this. But essentially, Albion was the son of Poseidon, who is the god of the sea. And he was born to be this kind of giant, and he's essentially an explorer, really, and kind of came across Great Britain and decided to kind of control the island. And it was through those jealous means that actually resulted in his fall, and that fall also led to 4 Zoas, and one of those which was born was Urizen. So a direct reference to reason in there as well. By kind of plodding through the poem in this way, I'd now like us to address the language that's coming across here by Blake. So I've already addressed the contrast here set up through that opening with this sort of definitive statement, almost like a sermon in itself, in its very sort of drumming sense, which contradicts with the love your neighbour, well, love thy neighbour as thyself, coming from the New Testament. We have these A, B, C, B closed rhyming couplets. Now, the fact that it's closed once again shows that there's no opportunity for dialogue and communication here and discussion. This is the way of religion. This is the way that things are going to be, and no one should challenge that. We also have the iambic tetrameter, which is being used to kind of suggest that, once again, things aren't supposed to be questioned, even in the falling of the meter through the wording. As I said before, we're left questioning who the voice of the poem is at the in that opening stanza. We may expect actually the child to be parroting some of the things that he has learnt perhaps from his elders, but actually we notice that he begins to go against that. The repetition of little and the uncovering and the exposure, vulnerability through that, plosive B sounds, the ironic use of the word holy, and the final thing I haven't really touched on, but the way in which it's presented through 6 of these heroic couplets, quatrains, we have this kind of narrative structure that begins to materialise. And as we kind of get to the final stanza, we're left with that rhetorical question. Whilst it seems like a story that does have a definitive, clear beginning, middle, and an end, the end is when the child's death comes about. We're actually left with a question which shows that the inevitability of the story isn't quite left there, and there's more to the story, which Blake wants us to consider and question throughout. The idea is then to explore going forward. I would suggest would be the capacity for selfish love, human limitations. It kind of comes back to the 2 contrary states of the human soul, doesn't it? Right from the offset with Blake, and how, you know, we're not wholly good or wholly bad. There's shade as well. And while in addressing these human limitations, should manifest in the human becoming more pietous and compassionate. We had the sheer abuse of innocence, and it is no mistake that this is through the form of religion, and therefore the role of religion in this poem takes a very sinister kind of character. So a very interesting one to explore going forward. You might want to stop this video now just to kind of get all your notes in order before we have a look now at A Little Girl Lost. I want to start off as we address this poem through this sort of conventional painting of the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve right at the forefront there, and how it kind of communicates this harmonious, idyllic, blissful existence before the inevitable fall of man. And how this is kind of, for me, emphasises what we're about to learn about within A Little Girl Lost. We start off the poem, and we have a reading actually by the preacher. Sorry, not the preacher, the prophet that we have seen in Blake's poems before, and it kind of functions those beginning stanzas as a bit of a prologue into the story of Ona and her lover. So we delve into this very primitive space. It's a utopia which seemed to be removed from the repressive ideas of a world of experience, and which are the result of a fall of man. And we have children of the future age reading this indignant page, know that in a former time, love, sweet love, was thought a crime. So it's kind of appealing to the future generation, where the capacity for this golden age can be obtained again. Now, in our understanding of the golden age now, and actually through the pastoral genre, the golden age refers to the Garden of Eden, situated and inhabited by Adam and Eve. We have Eve, who eats the fruit of temptation, and therefore they're into the world as we know it today, full of sin, full of a need for retribution, and, well, sheer darkness, essentially. And how the golden age is seen to be this very nostalgic state, because we can't get back to it now that we have this world of knowledge that we can't simply forget about. But Blake is appealing here that actually we can get back to that world of a golden age if we harness and exercise the best of the human mind and those human emotions. So the prophet then is suggesting that, yeah, we can get back to that. And how funny that people used to think that love was a crime. So we're kind of appealing here to Blake's own views about free love, and how that was tainted by the monogamy and the sort of social bonds and contracts of marriage, and only being with one person. But in the age of gold, free from winter's cold, youth and maiden bright, to the holy light, naked in the sunny beams delight. So we have, in the age of gold, we have two humans. We have a young maiden and her lover, and they're kind of playing in the garden. And it's assumed here that this would be the Garden of Eden. Notice that we have the references to gold, so it's, no mistake that I'm talking about the golden age. And we see through a lot of songs of experience references to the season of winter, the coldness, the darkness, and that's going to be very visible in this poem as well. But notice that the coldness and the wintry imagery is being overridden by the light and the brightness and the goldness, the sun, which is actually shining over it. So it's like the light here is victorious. She's compared to the holy light. She's naked, which would suggest that she's kind of in this kind of idyllic state. She's free from a world of knowledge and experience, and is delighting herself in it. She is synonymous here with positive light. Once a youthful pair, filled with softest care, met in garden bright, where the holy light had just removed the curtains of the night. Notice that everything here is being stressed about their naivety, their youthfulness, and how even their care is soft. So whilst they may not have been exposed to knowledge, they have something much greater, and that's care, and actually the most sincere human emotion that we can actually see. This repetition of the brightness and the light, and how the curtains of the night have been removed, so the darkness, the secrecy, the fear doesn't live in this environment. Tired with kisses sweet, they agree to meet when the silent sleep waves over heaven's deep, and the weary tired wanderers weep. So because their frivolity and their kind of playfulness is kind of moving to a more sexualized nature now, the youths are becoming tired, so they decide to meet in the nighttime, and we're now moving towards a more sinister tone in the poem itself. We're moving to a world of tiredness, weariness, which we know has a direct link with experience. And notice that we're having this alliteration of the W as well, so weary. And the sound W is kind of a longing kind of consonant anyway. So it's kind of stressing the tiredness that these two characters are beginning to feel. To her father white came the maiden bright, but his loving look, like the holy book, all her tender limbs with terror shook. So as she's delved into this world of nighttime, she is met by her father white, which we may associate with the role of God here. So she's still coming with her lightness, her brightness, her vigor, her energy. But notice that the father is white. And now we're actually having a difference here between brightness and light and whiteness being something linked with blandness, with plainness, with dullness, a lack of vibrancy, and actually how that's going to bring down the own vibrancy of this character, Ona. And how his loving look actually becomes like the holy book. So we have an irony surrounding the holy book. How can it be loving and holy if the child's innocence is now about to be completely taken away from her, because her tender limbs are shaking with terror. She's fearful of God, and she's fearful of the holy word and the holy book, which is about to ruin her life as she has known it to be. Instead, she is pale and weak. To thy father speak. Oh, the trembling fear, oh, the dismal care that shakes the blossoms of my hoary hair. We notice here that she goes from being this kind of bright, light, naked, dazzling in the sunny beams, to something that is pale and weak. And we have, she's unable to speak. She's unable to express herself. The capacity for imagination and expression has vanished from her. And we have this repetition of the fear that she feels. It's trembling now. We have the reference before from the softest care moved to a dismal care, so the dismal care of religion that's actually kind of taking away the softness that they were once experiencing. And now that shakes the blossoms of my hoary hair. So the hoary is like a dullness, a whitish greyish colour, which is the kind of colour which concludes the atmosphere of this poem. So as I've already said, the Golden Age is something that probably should be spoken about when you reference this poem. As I've already stated, it's this utopia, it's a pastoral idyll, it's a place situated before the fall of man, but Blake is actually arguing that it can exist again if people are not governed by the shame and fear of knowledge and controlled by the nastiness of the human abstract. It's a very nostalgic space. It seemed to be Edenic and this kind of blissful state of perfection, which is now tarnished through the darkness, through the whiteness, through the colourless world that the symbol of God actually brings to Ona. So we have lots of different kind of contrasts set up here, contradictions, which lead us on to our close of the poem, leading into this kind of dark space. So the last poem that we're going to be looking at is a divine image, which will conclude our study of Blake. So well done for persevering with all his poems, and hopefully you're really starting to get a really good grasp of the poems. So hopefully this will inspire some further thought for you.